Toyota has been in the news an awful lot lately about the depth of its commitment to full battery electric cars. The company's had a lot of credit for its hybrids. It introduced those more than 2 decades ago, and they do make a decent dent into vehicle emissions. But of course, full battery EVs are the next frontier. Tesla is kind of running away with the market around the world and here in Australia, and this is one of the cars that Toyota intends to put a stop to that. This is the BZ4X, the first series production Toyota EV. It's here in Australia and I'm gonna drive it today, much earlier than its release date, which is gonna be in the 4th quarter of 2023, sometime between October and December. So is the BZ4X worth waiting for? How much is it gonna cost? How much range does it have? We'll answer all of those questions in today's video. Hit subscribe down below. Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. When it comes to battery size, range, charging, warranty, and other running issues, the BZ4X is about mid-pack. Now, Toyota says that it's capable of 150 kilowatt charging speeds, which are actually decent for this segment. And the claimed recharging time with a compatible charger is about 30 minutes to go to 80% of the battery. So we'll obviously do our own range and charging tests once the car is launched here in Australia, so we'll know for sure. Now, the car has a 64 kilowatt hour usable battery, and the claim range is 470 Ks for this all-wheel drive model, and just over 500 if you're okay with front-wheel drive. And that's impressively low claimed consumption of about 13.6 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks for the all-wheel drive. But as we'll find out in just a second, I was only able to get 19 on my test drive today. Of course, that could be the fact that it's a UK car, we're at a test track here, I don't know, but that's obviously a lot worse than the claim. So we'll have to wait and see in the real world. Now, we have heard a bit about very slow recharging and very low range in super cold winter climates in Europe, but thankfully here in Australia with a very moderate sort of weather pattern, that shouldn't be too much of an issue, but we'll see. Now, an interesting thing is that Toyota actually warrants the battery of the BZ4X for 10 years. That's for 70% retention of its original capacity. So anything worse than that, then they'll basically swap out enough of the battery until you get back above that 70% mark. Moving around the back of the BZ4X now, it's pretty distinctly a coupe SUV. It's 4,690 mils long, which is about 7 centimeters longer than a RAV4, so that should give you a decent view of how big this car is. Now, this is a kind of top of the range all-wheel drive model from the UK. We've got a power tailgate as standard. It gets out of the way quickly and reveals this much space. I'll put the litre number on screen now. It's fairly practical. You've got some hooks, you've got a cargo blind, and those back seats fold 60/40 as well, so you can take longer stuff with you. But one feature you won't find on the BZ4X is a spare wheel. Jumping into the BZ4X, and it's immediately clear to me that this EV gets a lot right. Now, it's obviously very different to a Tesla Model Y in here, and if you like the interior design of the Teslas, then this will probably be something that you hate, and that's okay because there is something for everyone and design is subjective. But the first thing that I love about the interior of the BZ4X here in Australia on a hot day, kind of regretting this jacket, is that the seats are vinyl, much like they are on the Model Y, but they're perforated, which helps to wick away sweat, and they're also actively cooled. They've got heating and cooling in them, which just keeps you much colder, much calmer while you drive in the summer. Love that. That's going to play really well in Australia, especially because you can't get a RAV4 with cooled seats, which is a bit weird. Looking forward, we've got a very futuristic dashboard with this kind of funny old plastic panel here that leads up to a digital instrument cluster with your speed, range, consumption, media, navigation. You can put a lot up there, which is cool, and you can control that screen with these quick access buttons on this really alien sort of steering wheel. You've got a driver monitor here that's checking that you're looking at the road as well. Now, in the center, things are a bit more conventional. We've got a big, wide touchscreen, same as the one that's coming out in the 2023 Kluger and a few other cars in the Toyota universe. And then like touch buttons for the climate here. We have rockers for the fan and stuff, that's good. But then these other buttons for like air circulation and stuff, it's all piano black, so that's gonna mark up really horribly. This is piano black through here as well, awful. Really wish this was just like a matte plastic instead of a reflective fingerprinty surface. That's one thing I would change. And it's one thing Toyota hasn't used on the dash, which actually has this really cool textile on it, which is much nicer and cooler and more premium feeling than piano black. On the doors, all soft materials, more piano black, but it's quite a presentable interior. And even though the steering wheel and that screen look a bit freaky, everything actually works just as you'd expect from a normal car, and normalcy is the vibe of the BZ4X. The seats themselves, they've got electric adjustment, they're comfortable, they're supportive, and this light grey colour is also great for Australia because it reflects light. So hopefully Toyota Australia chooses to bring these grey seats out here for the BZ4X. This car was sourced from the UK. It's a high-spec car, 20-inch wheels, not quite representative of what we're going to get here in Australia. Here in the back, it's mostly good with a couple of negative points. In terms of the space on offer, really impressive. I'm 6 foot tall. I've got good headroom, despite the fact this car has a twin fixed non-opening sunroof. Legroom is amazing because the wheelbase of the BZ4X is longer than that of a RAV4, but tow room is a massive problem, and that's because we're sitting on the battery here. The driver's seat is at the lowest setting, and I don't have what my colleague Andrew Sluice calls a foot garage, as in a cutout in the battery where your feet could go, something that the Porsche Taycan has. That car's a little bit more expensive than this car, let's tell the truth, but it does mean that you've really got to splay your legs in order to get comfortable, and that's a problem that so many EVs in Australia have. Now, in terms of amenities, we've got air vents in the back here, we've got USB-C ports, no sun blinds, unfortunately, no heated rear seats, which actually helps you save range compared to blasting the heater in the winter, but we do get a flip-down armrest with cup holders and a device holder as well, and all these materials here are still soft, although this one is a little bit squeaky, which is weird because this is not a pre-production car. This is a production line car from the UK. So this is our first drive in the Toyota BZ4X on Australian soil. And a bit like the preview drive that I did for you guys in the Lexus RZ450E, I'm doing it here at a private test track. It's actually at the old Toyota Camry manufacturing plant in Victoria, and Toyota has quite a neat little track here with some high-speed corners, even a few bumps running down the center. And it's a good opportunity to get a taste test of the BZ4X before it launches in the fourth quarter of 2023 here in Australia. Now, we can't drive this car on the road because this is actually a UK market car, so it's not able to be registered. It has to be driven on private roads, but thankfully we've got a pretty good private road to do it on right here. So look, it is a preview, it's early days, so I'm just going to tell you what I've been able to take from the experience at first. And the main thing is that Toyota has engineered a battery electric vehicle here which is very, very smooth and easy to drive. It's not going to be the fastest battery EV, it's not going to be the sportiest, it's not going to have the longest range, but one thing that it will do is make life very easy to get out of one of Toyota's existing cars. You might already own a hybrid RAV4 or something like that, and you'll get into the BZ4X and you'll be like, oh yeah, this drives pretty much just like my old car. And while some people are looking for like a more futuristic, high performance experience, and those people will probably prefer like a Tesla Model Y, and that's okay, there is going to be a big chunk of people that just want to drive a normal car that happens to be fully electric. And the sense that I've gotten in this early impression is that that's exactly what the BZ4X is going to be good at. But let's talk about some specs if you're interested in those. There's basically two flavors of BZ4X, a front-wheel drive version and an all-wheel drive version, and both of them are under consideration for Australia. Speaking with me today, Toyota Australia bosses say they're very aware that more and more people are wanting to go for all-wheel drive, including on the RAV4 hybrid, so it would shock me if you couldn't get an all-wheel drive BZ4X in Australia. But basically, the front-wheel drive car, it makes 150 kilowatts of power. It's got a single motor on the front axle, and then the all-wheel drive adds a smaller 80 kilowatt motor on the rear axle. The peak maximum outputs are just above 160 kilowatts. So it's not intended to be a sports SUV. The Lexus RZ450E uses the same platform as this car and similar bones, including dual motor all-wheel drive, but it makes quite a lot more power. However, if we line up, we're in our 100 zone on this test track. If we line up on the test track here and we just plant it, you know, it's not sort of slow. Toyota claims 6.9 seconds, 0 to 100 for the all-wheel drive, 7.5 for the front drive. So like not super fast, but also not slow, kind of in line with a RAV4 hybrid, maybe a little bit quicker, despite the fact that this car is heavier than a RAV4, about the same size dimensionally though. That said, the BZ4X is lighter than a lot of other EVs on the market because Toyota has gone for a relatively small battery that has positives and negatives. A negative is that the range isn't as good as some other EVs. I did a little economy run today as best I could. I was able to get 19 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks on a 64 kilowatt hour usable battery. That means a real world range of just under 340 Ks. So not awesome, but about the same as a Tesla Model Y rear wheel drive. So it's not worlds apart from that car, but vehicles like the Hyundai Ioniq rear drive are going to give you more range than this car. That said, massive asterisk, we've got to do our real world highway range and recharging tests, which we're known for on Chasing Cars, so stay tuned for that late in 2023. But an upside to having a small battery is exactly what you're seeing right now. The BZ4X is quite rewarding to drive. And we've been saying that about new Toyotas for years now. Every new Toyota model that comes out seemingly has really nice dynamics. It steers well, it handles well, it rides well. And from what I can tell here on this closed track, the BZ4X has really nicely tuned steering. It corners very flat, that's typical for an EV, but it holds its weight really well in the corners and it feels like it's going to be a satisfying car to drive. And reading reviews and comparison tests from people overseas who know what they're talking about, the BZ4X is said to handle pretty nicely on a back road, and that's important to me, may or may not be important to you, but the smaller battery means less weight and more agility and possibly a better ride quality as well, although it's a little hard to test that attribute here. Now we've got a button on the center console for one pedal driving. It's not especially strong one pedal driving. When you lift off, as I'm doing now, you sort of slowly drift down to a slow speed. It's not like a neck snapping thing and there's only one mode. You can turn that off and then the car will just sail, and you'll either prefer one or the other, but you're not going to be able to get like a true one pedal driving experience, which I know a lot of people like. That said, the massive caveat is that this BZ4X is a UK spec car, all-wheel drive, 2022 build. Australia will be getting a 2024 model year in late 2023, and Toyota Australia has already told us there will be some undisclosed spec change to this car. They won't tell us what it is. Maybe it's going to get a slightly bigger battery, maybe it's going to get a bit more range, maybe it's going to get a bit more power, maybe the 150 kilowatt charging speed will be improved, especially because we know from overseas that cold weather charging hasn't been that great in the BZ4X, but here in Australia we get really moderate weather, so not expecting it to be a huge problem here, but there'll be something new. What I can say though is the safety systems are nicely tuned. The lane keep assist is subtle and smooth, and that means that you're not likely to turn it off. And we know that overseas there's been some pretty big recalls on the BZ4X. The fact that we're getting it so much later than the rest of the world means it's pretty likely that stuff will all be resolved before this thing enters Australian showrooms. So those are my very first impressions from driving the new Toyota BZ4X. Now, we know that the car that will come to Australia in late 2023 will be a little bit better than this one. There is some kind of specification upgrade coming later this year. As for price, we think it's going to be maybe 70 or 75,000, so quite a bit more expensive than the RAV4. Could be wrong, but Toyota is definitely softening the ground that this is not going to be a cheap car, and you can let me know your thoughts on that down below this video. But in terms of driving, it feels very smooth. It actually feels quite pleasant to drive. Not sponsored, not paid for by Toyota, just my impressions from behind the wheel. But of course, it's all going to be down to that on-road experience and a comparison with the Model Y and the Ioniq 5 and EV6 when this thing launches. But very keen to hear your opinions, so let me know. While you're down there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell if you've liked this video. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.